Hi, I'm Ashley Adamson, and today we're going to talk about male privilege and undoing that as a trans woman. It's kind of a touchy topic, would you say? There's a lot in there, and we're probably not going to be able to unpack all of it, but I've taken some notes today on some of the key points that I'd like to talk about in kind of working through this. Because as I have gone through my transition and the further I am away from the initial version of who I was before I transitioned, reflecting back, I can see all of these moments where there may have been microaggressions by me or just misperceptions or male privilege in who I was. And I have worked through that and also continue to be aware and work through that. This was the top voted topic from my patrons. So thank you, patrons, for voting. And if you want to be a part of that, feel free to sign up for my Patreon. So undoing male privilege. The first thing is noticing it. What are the behaviors that you notice that are male privilege? Now, you may also be exhibiting male privilege without knowing it or understanding that it is. And so just being mindful of the fact that you might have it and that you can notice it is going to start opening the doors to your perception and starting to see where it may exhibit its behavior. For me, I can look back and see some of the things that I've done in my past. I think especially in the work environment where I may have still had male passing privilege, ironically as a trans woman, because people were still reading me as a man, even though I was openly identifying and appearing as a woman. I was just non-passing. So I hear this a lot from women in the workplace where they feel like they're not heard. That sometimes they're getting not the credit they deserve, or they're being blamed for certain things, or they just can't say or express things for being too decisive or bossy. I think this is probably one of the more blatant areas that male privilege exists, is being in a place where you can be decisive, you can be more aggressive and not misread as someone who is more aggressive. Now, as a trans woman, you kind of take some of those workplace behaviors and you evolve them a little bit as you change. So thinking about kind of like how you're occupying your own space and what you're taking with you and what you should leave behind is sort of the first part of noticing and evolving it. Does that make sense? The second part is probably the more important part. I call it allow yourself to be humbled. What was it like when you first realized that you were trans, or realized that you needed to kind of revisit the way that you see things and the way that you see the world? That for me was a humbling experience. I thought I knew who I was. I thought I knew what I was doing and the world and everything. And suddenly the bottom came out and there was all of this unknown that was within me that I had no idea existed, was now trying to creep through in who I was. And I just didn't know what was what anymore. The whole world turned upside down. And that is a very humbling experience that I think is a great way of dismantling privilege, because a lot of privilege comes from the perspective that there is no other perspective than your own, and you are right and everyone else is wrong. And that privilege of seeing things that way makes it very hard for you to listen or be able to accept or understand other people's perspectives and see them as valid, because only your world is valid and you've had no indication or no clarity as to what isn't correct within your paradigm and within your view. Does that make sense? So allowing yourself to be humbled, and this is definitely a process that you initiate in when you admit that you're trans, is to start opening up your perception to reality, that perhaps your reality is not the only reality, in a way where perhaps you're wrong, or perhaps there's other perspectives that should be acknowledged and embraced. I sometimes see people over-index on the trying to get everyone's perspective and being more doubtful of who they are. And I think there's a nuance here, because being privileged doesn't necessarily mean that you're overconfident or that confidence is a bad thing. That's, I think, what I mean. Confidence is not necessarily a bad thing. Would you say it's a bad thing? Where have you encountered confidence where it is a bad thing? And where have you encountered confidence in yourself or in other people where it's a good thing? Right? Like, there's great examples where confidence can save a situation, confidence can create certainty when there is uncertainty, and confidence can let you move forward into things that you may be afraid to do. I was super afraid of making these videos, for example, these videos that you're watching now, and I've been doing for the last year, and it took me years and years to work up the confidence to do that. Had I have had more confidence to start with, I would have been making these a lot longer ago. So, like, confidence isn't necessarily a bad thing. It may come with privilege, but decoupling confidence from your experience of privilege and understanding that isolated on its own, it can be a good thing, is a great way of kind of working and counterbalancing this sense of humbledness. Does that make sense? Okay, and the third thing, reimagining yourself. Yes, so there's a lot in here, and I wasn't sure exactly how I'm trying to get at this because there's just like a lot, so just bear with me, but all of this is super important. So maybe I'll just start with, not all privilege is necessarily privilege. So I kind of touched on this with confidence. You don't need to kind of like get rid of everything that you may identify as privilege. Like, privilege is one of these weird things because privilege is sort of measured by who has less of it. You know what I mean? Like, people who are in worse off positions can then look up and point to the person above them and say, you have more privilege than me. And the person above, if they can listen and acknowledge that, will say, yes, I do have more privilege than you in this context. But then that person above can then look at the person above them and say, look, you have more privilege than me. You were born into a richer family. You didn't have alcoholic parents, what have you. And so there's sort of like this whole privilege pyramid that just keeps going. And I feel like it actually can go infinitely up and down. And so I don't want you to get caught up on this idea that you're also stuck in this privileged position and that you have to undo everything and try and account for every single different possible angle. That's exhausting. It's frankly a waste of your time. What you need to do is you need to look at and examine and not guilt bash yourself, because I had an intersex partner, and she would always... She's in the political sphere, and she would always guilt herself and shame herself for certain privileges, like being able to go to the beach. Well, what's the point of going to the beach when and not enjoying it because you're so obsessed about the fact that you're privileged that you can go there, that the beach, you've robbed yourself of the joy of being at the beach. Don't rob yourself of being happy by trying to address these privileges. Don't try and take away things that are just going to bring you joy and make you happy. That's not what this is about. Undoing your privilege is by undoing patterns that you have in who you are and how you operate that make you more toxic in your environment around you, more toxic to other people, and more toxic to the world, I suppose. Like, how do we exist and coexist in a world that is going through climate change, and how can we be a part of that process? So that's kind of like the larger kind of thing I wanted to step on, I guess that's the topic. Let me know what your thoughts are. It's a huge area, and there's probably way more things, but these were sort of the three most important areas that I think are really important for you. If you'd like to support me and you'd like to join me for live Q&A or meditation workshops that I give, I'm going to give Kung Fu workshops, or even download my book. You can check out my website, go to my Patreon, and thank you for all the patrons who are supporting me. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!